Hi, BC family. Welcome to our midweek devotion. This week, I wanted to talk to you guys about rising. Last week, I talked about our darkest moments and rising while it is yet night, but I really want to focus on the part of rising this week because rising starts on the inside of us before it can manifest on the outside of us. Now, I'm reading this book by Holly Wagner, and in the book, she talked about how as an adult, she decided to join karate classes. And she did it because she wanted to do all the cool kicks and the cool things. And so she went to her first class, and the only thing they did the entire class was they learned how to fall. That's it. The whole class was learning how to fall off, how to fall this way, how to fall that way, how to fall this way, how to fall that way. And then the next class, same thing. They only learned how to fall. And that happened for multiple classes. And then she finally was like, okay, maybe this week I'll learn something. And instead of something cool, she learned how to block a punch. And then the following week, they learned how to block a kick. And weeks of this went on where finally, eventually, she learned how to throw a punch and to throw a kick. And it wasn't until a few years later when she was sparring for her black belt that she realized the importance of taking all those weeks to learn how to fall, to learn how to block. She was in a sparring match and she kept getting swept off her feet, but she would pop right back up because it was like second nature to her. To get knocked down and get back up. It was instinctive. And that's really important to rising, is having that instinct of what to do when you fall. So Proverbs 24:10 says, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. I like how Holly Wagner used this verse and said, so if we let emotion rule us, if we do not rise, then our life will be defined by the falling. I would rather my life be defined by the getting up. Right? So this whole example that she had given in this book reminded me of my husband's career. For so many years, he was a special ops medic, and a lot of what they had to do was jump out of helicopters and airplanes on missions. And it's one of the things that they had to learn was how to fall. He would tell me all the time, you have to know how to fall when you're doing that. One, they have a special type of parachute that causes you to fall very fast. Two, he holds a lot of weight, especially as the medic. He holds pretty much more weight than other people when he jumps. So two things stood out to me about this example of falling and rising. When you are doing what my husband's doing in special ops, when you fall in enemy territory, you better know how to get up and you better know how to fall the right way, right? Because falling the wrong way could cause you to break bones, get knocked out, and then you become a hindrance to your team and an easy target to the enemy. You see, when you fall, if you don't rise up right away, then you give the enemy an open door to take you out, don't you? You're just laying there. You're like a sitting duck. You become an easy target when you don't rise up after a fall. When you're just laying there, you have all the tools on you. When he jumps out of the helicopter, he has everything on him he needs, including his weapon. It's all there. Every training ingrained in you, every weapon on you. But if he doesn't rise after the fall, if he doesn't get up, then the weapon and the training, it's useless to him, isn't it? It's useless and defeat is inevitable. The second thing I thought about with this is he jumps, like I said, with so much weight, and normally more than the others because he's the medic, so he has to carry more stuff. So he has a lot more baggage, but he still knows how to fall and how to rise up despite having the baggage on him. He knows how to take a hit, and despite the pain from that hit, you still rise up. Weapons ready, despite how sore you must have been from the fall or how hard you hit or how much baggage you carry, he rises up, weapons ready, and continues his advance on the enemy. That's what they do, right? So that decision to rise up was the same choice that he made to jump out of the plane to begin with. He decided to take a leap. It's a choice, and all of this starts on the inside of him, right? On the inside, you have to decide to rise up despite all the stuff. When they hit the ground in enemy territory, maybe they hit harder than expected. Maybe they couldn't see on their way down. He did a lot of missions at night. You don't see everything that you're doing. And you hit the ground in the dark. You take a fall. But instead of just laying there, he has to make that choice to get up, get your weapon ready, and move on. So you have to be willing to make that decision when you fall, despite what baggage you may carry, despite how hard you hit. In a spiritual sense, that's using your scriptures that you've been meditating on, teachings you have planted in your heart. You need to take your weapon or the sword of the Spirit and rise up, weapons ready, and continue to advance in the direction God called you to do. That's kind of our spiritual warfare, isn't it? We may have taken a hard hit or a hard fall, but we get up and we remember our scriptures. We remember our meditation. We remember what the word says. We take the sword of the Spirit. We have our weapons ready, and we continue to advance in the direction God called us to go despite taking a hard fall, right? But now I want to go ahead and take a moment and talk about the realities of a fall and how to rise in the midst of pain and anguish. Because that makes it sound easy. You fall on the ground, then you just pop back up. No big deal, right? So I'm going to tell you a story in 1 Samuel 30, 1-7. This tells the story of King David, who returned home from battle. He and his men had arrived to his city, and it was burning down. Okay, so they had just been in battle, and in 3 days it came back. And here's what scripture says. Now, when David came home, he found that the Amalekites had made a raid on the Negev and on the Ziklag, and had overthrown the Ziklag and burned it with fire. And they had taken captive the women and all who were there, both small and great. And when David and his men came to town, it was burned, and their wives and sons and daughters had been taken captive. Then in verse 4, we see the realities of this fall. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they were too exhausted to weep any longer. I want that to sink in for a minute. They cried so long and so hard that they couldn't even weep anymore out of sheer exhaustion. That is a reality of a fall in life, isn't it? When we fall, when we take hits, when we get a diagnosis, when we have another week of no pay, when we face the realities of our marriage or of our children's choices, it hurts. And it is okay to have that moment, to grieve, to weep, to be frustrated. It hurts to fall. And sometimes when we fall, it's not just the fall, but we get stuff heaped on top of us in the process. If you keep reading, in verse 5, it says, now David's 2 wives had been captured. I'm not going to pronounce their names. We're going to call them 2 wives had been captured. And further, David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, for all of them were embittered, each man for his sons and daughters. So not only did David have a hard fall coming home, his family was taken, his city is burning, but now, not only that, he's getting more heaped on top of him, isn't he? Everyone that he still has with him, his soldiers, they want to kill him because they're so upset. But remember, when you fall that hard, you still have your weapons and your training. And the very next verse shows that about David. It says, but David felt strengthened and encouraged in the Lord his God. He made a decision to reach for his weapon, to dig into what he knew was truth and rise in that moment, right? And that's a big moment. I mean, you saw it. They wept until they couldn't even weep anymore. They were so tired. It was a moment that is very hard. But instead of staying in that moment and letting his emotions overtake him and wallowing in self-pity, he made a choice. Get my weapon and move. Now watch this. David didn't just rise and chase after what he thought was his. No, he rose and sought God's direction. Because one could assume, okay, get up and go get your family. But that's not what David did. In verse 7 it says, David said to Abiathar, the priest, please bring me the ephod. So he brought him the ephod, and David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this band of raiders? Will I overtake him? He didn't assume his next steps. He asked God, shall I pursue them? I'm sure he wanted to with everything that was in him, but he went to his weapons and his trainings and said, should I pursue them? And God answered, pursue, for you will certainly overtake them, and you will certainly rescue the captives. Now notice, David didn't just sit around waiting for God to tell him what to do to change his circumstances. No. First, he had to rise on the inside. He rose and went to God. He didn't sit in his self-pity and his despair waiting for God. He rose and went to God, trusting that God wants to deliver him and bring him to victory. So I want to leave you this week with some verses from one of my favorite songs. It's a song that has helped me a lot through life, and it's from Britt Nicole, and it's called The Sun is Rising. So some of the verses are, when life has cut too deep and left you hurting, the future you had hoped for is now burning, and the dreams you held so tight have lost their meaning, and you don't know if you're ever going to find your healing. The very next one is, you're going to make it. You're going to make it. And the night can only last for so long. Whatever you're facing, if your heart is breaking, there's a promise for the ones who just hold on. So lift up your eyes and see that the sun is rising. So that promise for the ones that just hold on, for the ones who rise up from within and hold on to the promises God have given you. Look up and from the dark place where you fell and see the hope that lights your path this week. Have a great week.